What is going on, everybody? What is going on, the Catch fam? My name is John Dawson, and in today's video, we are hopping into my must-start players for Week 7 of the 2022 fantasy football season. If you guys do enjoy today's content, be sure to hit that like button on the way in. Hit that subscribe button, of course, if you are new to the channel, and feel free to drop any comments, questions, concerns pertaining to the 2022 fantasy football season down below, and I'll get back to you as soon as I possibly can. Without further ado, let's hop into today's video. First up on the list, we've got Lazard of the Green Bay Packers. I think he's an incredibly safe wide receiver to play moving into Week 7. He's only played in 5 games on the season, but through those 5 games, he has averaged 14.5 fantasy points in full PPR. And on top of that, he has 4 touchdowns through those 5 games. He has been incredibly consistent throughout the season so far, giving you double-digit fantasy performances in 4 out of his 5 performances as well. So I love him going up against this Washington Commanders secondary that is ranked 26 overall in the league against opposing wide receivers. I would have no hesitation to have Lazard in your starting lineups moving into Week 7. All right, next up on the list, we've got Kenneth Walker, who I know for a lot of you guys feels like an absolute no-brainer, but I've gotten enough questions throughout the week about Kenneth Walker potentially staying on the bench, or other running backs, maybe other receivers that are really strong options moving into the flex option for you guys. You know, Kenneth Walker was a long-term stash or a waiver wire pickup for a lot of fantasy managers, so there are some tough decisions out there for owners of Kenneth Walker, but I would not hesitate at all to have Walker in your starting lineups heading into Week 7. He's had 16.9 points per game in his first full 2 starts throughout the year so far, and the Chargers are the 4th worst team in the league against opposing running backs, and they were the worst team in the league before Monday Night Football, where they played very well against Melvin Gordon, Latavius Murray and company on the Denver Broncos. So I love Walker going in to the weekend. This matchup against the Chargers should provide a much better game script overall. And even against Arizona last week, which wasn't a good game script from a fantasy perspective for a majority of the offensive players on both teams, Kenneth Walker had a great fantasy day, scoring 19 fantasy points, a touchdown, and 97 yards on the ground. So I would not hesitate whatsoever to make sure that Kenneth Walker is in your lineups as we approach Week 7. All right, next up, we've got Alec Pierce of the Indianapolis Colts. Man, I have been in love with Pierce over the last 3 or 4 weeks. Really, when we saw him make a lot of connections with Matt Ryan against the Kansas City Chiefs, I just had that feeling, right? And we liked Pierce in the offseason, and now that he's become comfortable in his role and he's fully healthy, right, he has really shined within this offense. He's a beautiful chemistry with Matt Ryan. I understand that he's just over 10 points per game through his last 4 starts, but overall, man, I just really think Alec Pierce is an extremely safe flex option in full PPR scoring formats. I can understand if you're in a standard or half scoring not wanting to start Alec Pierce, but I think he's a great start, right? The Titans are the 2nd worst team in the league against opposing wide receivers, so I am really tuning the horn for Pierce as we move in to Week 7 as a whole. And I think Michael Pittman is another great start, but I know that Pierce is a bigger question on a lot of fantasy managers' benches as opposed to Michael Pittman. But I would have a lot of confidence as Alec Pierce as a very strong flex option moving into Week 7. All right, next up on the list is Gerald Everett, tight end of the LA Chargers. He's averaging 9.7 points per game in full PPR at the moment. He comes in as your tight end 9 on the season so far, and the last 2 weeks have been pretty disappointing, right? Week 5, 1.2 fantasy points. Week 6, 7.9. Not an awful game, but when you look at some of those ceilings we had earlier in the year between 13 and 17 fantasy points, we're definitely missing a solid performance overall from Gerald Everett. He gets his former team, the Seattle Seahawks, in Week 7, who are the worst team in the league moving into Week 7 against the tight end position. I get that Keenan Allen might come back for this game, but Josh Palmer's banged up, and Donald Parham, who stole some targets over the last week or so from Gerald Everett at the tight end position, is also out with a concussion, right? So I like this start for Gerald Everett. I think it's a really solid fantasy start moving in to the week. I know that a lot of fantasy managers have lost some faith in Gerald Everett with those last 2 weeks or so being poor performances. And I know for a lot of fantasy managers, Everett was a tight end 2 on your roster, but I would have full confidence starting him moving into week 7. All right, there's no way I could move into the week and not have Josh Jacobs on this list, right? For the majority of these videos, I'm looking at players who you're probably like having an argument with yourself about, who are sitting on your bench, or maybe a player who's going to be in your flex spot. But Josh Jacobs is locked and loaded here in week 7. He's coming in as your RB7 overall at the moment. In his last 2 starts, he's averaging 32.4 points per game. It's absolutely crazy. I'm going to keep this one short and sweet. Houston is the worst team in the league against opposing running backs. Josh Jacobs has been absolutely balling out the last 2 or 3 weeks. He should be an absolute must start moving into week 7. All right, last player on the list. We're going to have a quarterback on here, and this one might surprise you, but I've got Tua time coming back from the concussion debacle, some controversy with his injury. He gets the Steelers. They are the 25th worst team in the league against opposing quarterbacks. He got a prime time football game on Sunday night. The Steelers secondary has played very poorly throughout the season. Tyreek Hill looked great last week. Jalen Waddle looked great last week. Mike Gesicki, who might get traded, looked great. Raheem Mostert is back and fully healthy. Man, I think this Dolphins offense and a team that was humming early in the season is going to come back and have a solid performance in prime time. I say roll with Tua. I know he's been on a lot of your guys' benches and you guys have been struggling at the quarterback position. If Tua was your primary quarterback, I say you throw him in your lineup this week and you ride full steam ahead with Tua time as we move in to week 7. That'll do it for today's video. If you guys did enjoy the content today, be sure to hit that like button on the way out. Hit that subscribe button. Of course, if you're new to the channel, really does help us out. If you guys hit that like and consider subscribing, and please feel free to drop any comments, questions, concerns pertaining to the 2022 fantasy football season down below. I'll get back to you as soon as I possibly can. With that, I'll say thank you guys so much for watching and or listening, and remember, you saw it here on The Catch.